Welcome back, everybody, to the introduction to the 1987 Supermod series. Today, we're going to be discussing broadcasters and all of the broadcasters that have been edited into this game and brought into this game. Unfortunately, in the original version that Gennady did back in 1987, it was not a proper um, reflection of how television actually worked in 1987 or in the 80s in general, as far as its relationship with wrestling. The game was pretty much set up as far as broadcasters went towards national coverage, and there was very little local coverage available. Pro wrestling did not work like that. Pro wrestling was mostly syndication. In the 1980s, there were some national broadcast deals, such as the WWF with USA or uh, Jim Crockett Promotions having the Superstation TBS that gave them national coverage. But most of your programming for pro wrestling was done in syndication. So that was a collection of local networks throughout the country. The AWA ran this way. Uh, all promotions ran this way. It was just a matter of how many stations they could get around the country to show their footage. So we're going to go ahead and get in here and look at the broadcasters, and you'll be able to see how I added in here and accurately reflected what the marketplace looked like back then. Let's start with the USA. Obviously, we're going to stick with terrestrial free-to-air because that best represents antenna, which you could get off your antenna just having a regular television in your home, and what stations you could get, and then obviously whatever pro wrestling ended up on those stations. This was a very successful formula for pro wrestling for years, and unfortunately it just was not represented properly in the original mod. So I went ahead and updated that and put it in here. So about 90% of these networks were not in the system here until I added them in. So for example, you're seeing a lot of them that I added here. So let's click on WTOG. Okay, WTOG was based out of St. Petersburg, Florida. Uh, it was located in the southeast. WTOG was a big station. It had big coverage. It not only was in Florida, but it would spread into other states also. Therefore, it ends up with big coverage. Championship Wrestling from Florida was on this station for years, and it had a lot of success getting into other states and other markets because of the power of this station. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at a few more here. WFLD 32. This is channel 32 out of Chicago. Yes, it was always affiliated with Fox since the early 1980s, but right here, Fox 32 was a big channel that went over state borders. It had a high powered station. So not only are you getting coverage here in the Great Lakes, which was medium, but there was also small coverage in the Midwest. The WWF had syndication through WFLD in the 80s and into the 90s, doing a lot of their Saturday morning television shows. So almost all these stations were not in the original game. These have been added. MSG Network was in the original game, but I think it only showed like a small or something for Tri-State. That's not accurate. MSG was a huge station, and it had coverage and very large coverage in all three states in that area. So again, we continue on here. KTSF, that was a small station, small independent station out of San Francisco, California. So the way I learned about these television stations was by reading a book about the territories that came out a few years ago, and it listed a lot of these stations in there, and I was able to do some research on them and then put them into the game to make it more realistic. So another key one here was the Christian Broadcasting Network. This was not in the original game either. World Class was on CBN in the 70s and into the early 80s. CBN was a huge network, and that helped world class get propelled into a national spotlight. At this point, in 1987, World Class Championship Wrestling, the television show, was not only on cable, but it was also on CBN. They were getting mass coverage. Okay, so again, we can just scroll through these really quickly, and you'll see all these local stations with appropriate size next to them based on their broadcasting power that have been added into the game. Now, this is realistic. Like KCAL right here, they carried the WWF in California. So if we keep, you just keep going through this list, you'll see the shows that are here. I'm sorry, the proper television stations and the shows that were on them. Now, obviously, some of these, such as right here, that's not a proper reflection. That's my current game. I was able to get a deal, get AWA being shown on Hawaii there. I also did research as much as I could and found the old graphics for the channels in the 80s and made sure to go ahead and put them in there where I could. Some of them I just couldn't find the old graphics for the channels. That's a pretty cool old graphic I was able to find. KWGN out of Denver. So again, I think there was about 100 broadcasters that I was able to add to the game to make it more realistic to the time period. So not only the USA did I add broadcasters, but I also added them to other countries, such as Canada. We can take a look at Canada. Here's Canada. Same thing. The original game only really had a few stations in Canada, and they were national stations, cable stations, that kind of stuff. It didn't properly reflect local television stations. So I was able to put all these in here by doing some research. And again, a lot of these that you see current deals with were real. Those are the real stations that had deals with those wrestling companies at the time. And what's pretty cool too is some of these stations had good enough power where they could get transferred over the border. So that's reflected. There's also television stations for Europe, India. Let's take a look at India here. Doordarshan, which I think is how it's pronounced, was not in the game before. Doordarshan's a huge national syndicated network in India, so that's represented here. I think I have the Soviet one in here too. Good luck getting that one in the game, though. It's not easy. Yeah, there you go. TBCCCP. That was the Soviet national television station. I think ZDF was originally on there. I'm not sure who ZDF is. We also added more pay-per-view stations that was not quite properly represented. So we were able to add more pay-per-view options. That just about does it for broadcasters and the work that was put in for broadcasters in this game. And, as time goes on, we'll probably end up even adding more as I learn more about broadcasters. But it's a nice feature of the Super Mod to be able to have that access at your disposal to help build your company. And it's realistic. Those were real channels back then. Back then, television stations liked pro wrestling because it had a very high viewer rate and it was cheap to produce. So there was I can remember growing up, in the mid to late 80s, being a little kid and seeing on our local television stations late at night, early on Saturday mornings, independent promotions, outlaw promotions. Saw it carry all the way through the 90s. So it's properly depicted here in the Supermod. So that's it for broadcasters. Thanks again for listening. If you wouldn't mind subscribing, commenting, give us a like, whatever you can do. This will just help us to continue to grow. And thanks again. Take care.